Hey, welcome everyone. We're glad you're here. We're going to give it about 30 more seconds for people to join, and then we'll jump right into the webinar. Okay, I think we will get started. We have a few more joining, but we'll just jump right in. So hello everyone, I'm Karim Harji, the Program Director for the Oxford Impact Measurement Program. We're glad that you're here with us for today's webinar on leading with impact, innovative IMM approaches for family offices. So what we're going to talk today about is how three different family offices are approaching impact measurement and management in their own unique contexts. They're very different. There are different stages of their own evolution. They are addressing different kinds of areas and thematic strategies, as well as using different kinds of capital. And so I'm delighted that we'll have the chance to work through these three very different examples, but also pull out some common lessons and ideas for their experience so far, as well as what it might mean for others who are designing similar approaches, regardless of where you are in your journey. So here's the plan for today. I'm going to make some introductory remarks just to situate the topic. And for those of you that are a bit newer, I'll give a very brief introduction to IMM, Impact Measurement and Management. We run an entire program that covers a lot of the issues around impact measurement, and I'll speak a little bit about that in the next slide. And then we'll get right into the three different approaches and examples. And then we'll use the second half of the webinar to reflect on some of the lessons, the things that you should do and not do, as well as some of the resources that each of our panelists will have provided in terms of the strategies and the tools that they've developed, as well as from other organizations. We encourage you to use the Q&A function to ask your questions as we go. We have time at the end to be able to pick those up, but we might also address them as we go along. We'll try and get out a lot of the content to you in the first 2/3 of the webinar, and then use the last third or so to be able to engage with your questions. We also have a few polls coming up in the next couple of slides, so we didn't just want to hear more about where you are in your journey and the kinds of questions that might be interesting for you. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be shared with you within the next week or so, which means that you have access to all of the slides, the recording, and many of the links and tools that we're going to share with you. So as you'll see, there's a lot that we're packing in over the next hour, and we hope that it provides value for you, regardless of where you are in your journey around IMM. Just to briefly introduce who's on the panel today, in some ways the virtual panel. So I've already talked about my role. I run the impact measurement program. I teach in our impact investing and impact finance innovations programs. And so for many of our programs, we already cover many of the issues around what is impact, how to begin to think about measuring it, and the role and relevance of family offices. And I'm delighted that we've got three speakers today who all have, I think, deep experience, have been pioneers in their own way in many of these topics, and whom I've had the pleasure of working with over several years in many of the examples and tools that we'll share today. So I'll make some brief introductions, and you'll learn more about them as they get into the work of each of their respective organizations. So we have Joanna Cohen, who's joining us from Builders Vision in the US. Joanna is the head of IMM. Joanna is one of our program alumni through OIMP, and we previously worked together in her previous role at MacArthur Foundation, where she was leading some of the evaluation work related to their Catalytic Capital Impact Investing Initiative. Joanna is going to talk about how she built out the impact measurement and management function at Builders Vision, and in a relatively short time, how it's evolved to something that is a powerful roadmap for other family offices that are thinking about doing similar things in terms of a discipline, approach, and set of capabilities around IMM, even if you're relatively new to this work. Olga Cruz is from Good and Well. here in Toronto, in Canada. She's a senior associate who has been leading a lot of that work, not only on IMM, but also on ESG. Olga and I have worked together over the last few years to help to refine their strategy. And as you'll see in the guides that she will share shortly, there's a lot of fantastic material in terms of the approaches, the lessons, and really a step-by-step approach for any other family office to think about how they might adapt and build on some of that work. So I've been, I think, quite impressed with the type of work that not only Good and Well have done, but also their willingness to share all of it in such a public way. And I think that's beneficial for many family offices who are just getting started on this journey. You don't have to be intimidated because there are a lot of starting points, including the ones that Good and Well will share shortly. And Marcus Bleasdale is Managing Director of Willstar AS in Norway. Marcus was one of our early alumni in the Impact and Measurement program, and he now teaches as guest faculty in the program. He'll talk about the approach that Willstar has taken, and as you'll see, moving from philanthropy to impact investing, and now even broadly influencing the family office in a range of different ways, using a quite specific set of approaches around impact valuation. And again, similar to both Joanna and Olga, Marcus has been very generous in sharing a lot of his expertise and knowledge more broadly with other family offices. So I'm delighted to have all three here with us to give both an overview of their approaches and their lessons, but also share with us some of the latest thinking about what to do and what not to do. In terms of just the topic of IMM, this might be familiar to many of our attendees on the call because you've been on some of our webinars before. But when we think about IMM, we're really trying to understand what are the positive and negative effects that might come as a result of our business decisions, our investments, and even our philanthropy, both on people and planet. So there's a social and environmental dimension to them. Often we're defining a range of goals. We have a range of approaches to try and measure, and then we want to be able to manage forward. And so we don't only look back to understand what happened, we want to really try and understand how we do better looking forward. And this area is quite interesting because there's a lot happening. It should be obvious that all organizations have non-financial impacts. And so really, this isn't just about family offices, it's about how every organization should be able to manage and measure what it's doing. Impact does look different depending on the kind of organization or strategy that you have. And therefore, being clear about that is an important prerequisite to thinking about how you might measure it and then manage it. There are lots of tools and frameworks, and we'll cover some of those on this webinar, but we'll also have some other resources to share with you around how the practices around impact measurement are emergent, but also that there are a lot of starting points, regardless of where you are on your journey. And much of this is being accelerated by changes in regulations in particular, as well as this proliferation of tools and frameworks and approaches that we'll cover. In our program, which if you're interested, you can get in touch with my colleague Tennille, who's on the call today. We have this framework around how we move from the why questions to the what questions to the how questions, and then the implications for measurement. And so you'll see this referenced in the examples when we get into them, is it's really important to understand why we're measuring. There are a number of different things you could measure, both in terms of using different tools, but also thinking about the different aspects of measurement. But equally important is what do you do after you learn all the things that have happened in the past as you think about the decisions moving forward. So if you're interested, get in touch with us and we'll share a bit more information later. And I just wanted to make a connection to one other initiative that we have at the Site Business School called the Ownership Project 2.0. This is an initiative led by my colleague Bridget. There's a link here at the bottom, and it's really trying to explore how family offices are engaging in the set of strategies and questions and choices around how they're more deliberate about what impact looks like within their strategy. So if you're interested, if you're a family office that wants to either participate in the research or is interested in how other family offices are engaging in their broad work around integrating impact, please get in touch with us and we'll direct you to Bridget to be able to learn more about this set of research, which has been going on for a couple of years and will continue for a few more years as well. So with that, that's the background. We want to learn a little bit more about who's on the webinar. And so, Darius, I might prompt you to pull up the poll, please. We have 3 polls, which I think you can answer all at the same time. Poll 1 is just trying to get a better sense of who our audience is today. We have a few questions here. So if you can select the one that best represents you, we recognize that some of you have multiple hats. So we want to understand whether you work at a family office. Are you another kind of impact investor? Are you broadly working in impact investing as an advisor, intermediary, or an impact measurement? Do you classify as an enterprise or venture, or the other category? So that's poll 1. Poll 2 is give us a sense of your understanding and experience and knowledge around impact measurement, which could come from either impact investing or other topics. Are you early or have some experience or significant experience in this topic? Again, just to give us a sense of how far we can go in some of our examples and lessons. And then the third question is, at what stage are you in your own journey or your organization's journey around thinking about IMM? Are you early in your journey, just exploring it? Have you started already in designing or building something? Or are you actively implementing or refining your strategy? And there's a choice here for other or not sure. So we'll give it another 20 seconds or so. See, most people have already responded to some of the questions. And this is just to give us a sense of where you are. And we will then direct our remarks in the next few slides accordingly. Okay, maybe we will, I think we can close the poll now. I think we've got a good number of folks that have already shared. So we've got a pretty good range in who's on the audience today. We've got family office representation, but also impact investors, folks that are interested in or working in impact investing and impact measurement, and then also from the other categories. It's actually a fairly even spread across, which is great. Many of you already have some knowledge or experience, or even significant knowledge or experience in impact measurement, which is great for us. We can get right into some of the weeds of some of the content that we're about to show you. And it seems that most are already started or actively designing and implementing and evolving their strategies, which is great. So thank you for sharing that. Regardless of where you are in your journey, I think we'll have something here for you. And with that, let's move on to the content. So I'm going to now hand it over to Olga, who's going to start us off by talking about Good and Well's approach and how they situate IMM. So Olga, over to you.
Thank you, Karim. So Good and Well is a family office based in China. And our ultimate goal is mainly to create and help catalyze this vibrant, more equitable, and sustainable market. There are mainly 3 strategies that we are using. So the first one is we are sourcing and investing in early stage companies that have high impact and growth potential. Then the second one, of course, we need to support these companies. Part of what we do for them is provide this impact measurement and management advice and guidance. Then we engage students with these companies because we believe it's really important to support this next generation of leaders and help them understand how they can bring their humanity to work. And finally, we actively share our learnings with other family offices, other investors. That's why I'm here today. But we think that by doing this in a really open way, we will help also improve the practice of IMM and impact investing overall. You can go to the next slide. So when we started our IMM journey, we didn't really have any formal processes. We were relying heavily on our intuition and our experiences. We were evaluating these companies. But then with time, as the portfolio was growing, we realized that to advance in our goals and to do it more quickly, we needed to implement these practices. And something I want to highlight is that we're backed by a single family. So we didn't really have the need to put out something just for like marketing. We just really cared about how this could implement the strategy and help us and help our investees make better decisions. So we looked at everything that was out there. We did a really thorough research, and then based on everything that we found, we thought, okay, how we can apply this throughout the investment life cycle, what works, what doesn't work for us, and what's cost effective. And we had mainly 4 goals. So the first one was to help clarify our goals as well as the goals of the investees, and also to align those goals with our actions. Then the second one was around being able to understand if we were really making progress towards those goals. Then the third one, of course, we wanted then to strengthen and optimize that impact. And finally, we wanted to make sure that we were able to identify and minimize any unintended consequences. So this is everything was related to the ESG work. And we can go to the next slide. So let me explain a little bit more how our portfolio is built so you understand why this framework works for us. So we have mainly 3 buckets. There are companies that are influencing consumers. So these ones, for example, are ethical fashion brands that have really complex supply chains. The second group is about companies that are influencing institutionals. So for example, we have invested in an asset manager. We have invested in companies that are providing even like marketing to the group of portfolio companies. And then the final one is around companies that are building the space. So these are all pretty different. We are industry agnostic, but of course, everything that we're investing in, we understand it. So we wanted to make sure that we were getting the data that was helpful for us, but mainly data that was helpful for our portfolio companies, and that they could use it to adjust their models to realize if they needed to make some changes in their impact. So the way how our framework works, if you see, we have this big circle in the middle, and that's related to the core impact of the portfolio companies. So then the next part is related to the ESG of the investees. So there can be amazing companies that have a wonderful impact at its core. For example, let's say a company that is providing software to understand what's happening with workers, but you also, like workers that are in remote areas. But you also want to make sure that they are at least reaching a threshold in terms of their environmental, social, and governance practices. You want to make sure that, for example, they're paying living wages, that they have enough diversity, that the way how they're sourcing is ethical. So in our process, when we're looking at a company, we use the 5 dimensions of impact of the impact management project to understand better what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what type of impact we expect. So that's related to the first goal that I was saying, clarifying the impact. Then after we do this, once we have invested in a company, with the founder, we co-design the theory of change. And this helps us, again, clarify the different steps that they're going to follow to get to that ultimate goal. But also it helps us set the clear scope for the metrics. So we have a mix of output and outcome metrics, and we try to have maximum, let's say, 7 goals per company. We don't want it to be too complicated. Let's remember these companies are really early in their journey, and also they have limited resources, and you want to keep it simple as much as possible. So once we identify the metrics, we start monitoring and learning. So biannually, we collect impact measurement and management and metrics, and quarterly, we're collecting operational and financial metrics. but we collect everything through the same platform. We want to be able to see in a dashboard the three things at the same time. And we think that this is really important for us to really be able to create those examples of companies that are doing good while doing well. And then based on everything that we're learning, we adjust the practices, we set targets, and we're constantly thinking about, is this useful for the founders? How are they using this information? How is this useful for us? So once we're able to analyze the core impact of the company and as well collect the ESG assessment annually, we use this to take action. Otherwise, we review what we have to adjust in our process. So as you can imagine, the data collection process was getting a little bit complex. And I mean, I lead IMM for Good and Well, but it's just me. I don't have a team of people supporting me. So I also needed to automate some parts of the process of data collection. So we now have this software that sends a report request to the investees, and they're able to input the data for financial, operational impact metrics as needed. The software sends them the reminders, and it helps everyone visualize what's happening, as well as it helps us aggregate some things and compare some things at the portfolio level. That being said, we also have looked at many ways how we could aggregate the impact or not, and we realized that for us it's not that useful. Each one of our companies is doing something completely different, so there are not many things that we're doing in terms of that. And then the other thing that we're working on right now is something that we call this ESG maturation model. I can speak more about this later in the learnings and why we're doing it. But for now, we think that this is working. We continue learning about it. And yeah, we're also really open to your feedback.
Great. Thanks, Olga. And as we'll cover a little bit later, we'll show the step-by-step guide that has a lot more of the details on each of these steps on the left-hand side. And it's a fairly structured process right now, but in some ways was developed over multiple phases of testing, evolving, doing, and then improving as the portfolio also evolved and the companies themselves had different needs and issues and opportunities around both impact and ESG. And I think there's some important takeaways from this around how you can build a fairly structured approach, how you can begin to also integrate impact and ESG, and also, as we'll cover later in the lessons, whether or not a portfolio aggregation approach is appropriate and at what stages, because I know we have one question around that, and so we'll pick that up in the next section. Thanks, Olga. Why don't I hand it over now to Joanna, who's going to talk about Builder's vision and their overall approach and some of the ways in which they're approaching IMM.
Thanks, Karim, and thanks to all the participants for sharing time today. By no means do I feel like, I'm gonna share about the approach that we've developed at Builder's Vision for IMM, but by no means do we feel like we have it all figured out. So I'm very excited to be connected to this community because I think that we'll all get better at this by sharing what's worked and what hasn't. So Builder's Vision is an impact platform, very fancy way of saying that is Lucas Walton's family office. And we have, as a family office, we have a shared vision for a humane and healthy planet with the mission to shift markets and minds for good, which we primarily do in 3 focus areas: oceans, climate and energy, and food and agriculture. And, these are the goals, the impact that we're aiming to have or that we're pursuing in each of these areas are really complex. And to Lucas's credit, recognizes that we can work across, and in fact, we probably need to work across the capital spectrum to address these really hairy problems. And so we set up the office to do just that. And so we have different teams, each of which specialize in different capital deployment tools, but they're all working toward these shared goals around these 3 focus areas. And so one of our teams all the way at the bottom is S2G Ventures, which is our venture capital team. They're doing direct investments, market rate investments, in each of these focus areas. I say venture capital, although they're starting to work in the growth equity space as well. All the way at the top is our asset management team. They're kind of the financial engine behind our office, and they're making the kind of big ticket investments into fund managers. And increasingly that portfolio is ESG and impact aligned. And then in the middle is Builders Initiative, which is our philanthropic team. And I like to think of them as kind of a microcosm of the whole platform, because in that one team, they're working across the capital spectrum. So everything from a pretty robust grant-making portfolio to an endowment that fuels that grant-making portfolio that is now 90% ESG and impact aligned. And those investments are indirect investments, so investments into fund managers in both public and private markets. And then we also have an LLC that through which we're making kind of impact first investments, both in companies as well as fund managers. So a lot going on. And we are across all of that. Hopefully it's kind of clear that impact is part of the DNA of the platform. And with that commitment to impact is a commitment to impact measurement management. And really understanding, what works, what doesn't, in service of understanding how we can best deploy resources to drive the impact in those three focus areas. And so I started about 3 years ago. It was a blank slate situation, and I was given the charge of show impact across the impact platform. And so I wanted to first set some principles and practices, standard principles and shared practices that we could use across the platform, so across all of those different teams, then that would work and that makes sense, and make for sound impact measurement management, regardless of capital type or regardless of impact area or impact domain. And so the practices, we just really boiled down to 3 practices, that we believe will really lend itself to good impact measurement and management, but then that we then customize to the particular context of each of those teams. And we feel really strongly that IMM works at its best when it is embedded into the decision-making cycles of an organization, whether it is individual investments or portfolio, all the way up to kind of enterprise strategy. And so, Karim, if you want to go to the next slide, this is an example of how we have integrated a focus on impact and ESG into our investment process. Of course, this investment process is a generic one. It looks a little bit different according to our different teams and investment types. But generally, what's shown at the top is the stages of the investment. And then what's shown in the bottom and what's bolded in that burnt orange is the standard tools that we use to operationalize our commitment to IMM at each step across the way. And so, in pre-investment, we're really thinking about what are the key questions, what's the information that's going to help us inform decision making around an investment. And that looks a little bit different, but we have really benefited a lot from using the methodology first set out by the Impact Frontier community. So those impact ratings that allows us to look at potential impact alongside potential financial performance, and that's been really helpful and really initiated a lot of rich discussions in investment committee meetings around, what is the best way, what is the best use of our funds. So, and then in post-investment, we really are thinking about, based on what we learned pre-investment from due diligence, we really try to meet our partners, whether they are companies or fund managers, where they are, and understanding, what is our role as a value-add investor? How can we help position them for success in the market through IMM. So, what are their internal capabilities to consider impact and ESG as they're doing their work? And we are trying to think about, different resources and tools that allow us to do that. And at the bottom, of course, it's just it's a nod to the fact that, the IMM team is not working in a vacuum. We are working very closely with our investment team colleagues. And, we, like Olga mentioned, we are a very small but mighty team. And so, there are certain parts of this process wherein, it would be great if the IMM team could lead, but we just don't have the bandwidth. And so we've had to translate some of that responsibility over to the investment team, which has been great. And we'll see how that evolves over time.
Great. Thanks, Joanna. And so similar, I think, to Good and Well, again, a fairly structured approach, but actually, as Joanna mentioned, took 3 years to begin to build out the clarity, the consistency, and just test the right level of discipline and diligence and consistency. And in this case, with the Builders Vision broad platform, which has multiple types of capital, both transaction goals and field building goals, in a different way than Good and Wells. But I think one key point that I appreciate for both organizations is that there's a very structured, thoughtful approach that still has a degree of flexibility that is acknowledging the internal context and building out, but also the external context in terms of how you're trying to show up, how you're trying to share and engage with other organizations, and recognizing that often doing IMM well involves bringing others along with you. And I think, Marcus, you might touch on this as well, because I know that's been part of your journey. So we've got a couple of questions coming in for both Olga and Joanna so far, and we'll pick those up in the next section. But let's cover Willstar's approach. And so, Marcus, I'll hand it over to you to tell us a little bit about how Willstar's approached IMM across its portfolio.
Yeah, thanks, Karim, and thanks, Olga and Joanna, for sharing your methodology. It's really interesting. And quite aligned, actually. We do some things very, very similarly, especially in the foundation side of the impact measurement. So it's quite nice to see. But Willstar is an impact organization that's focused on building sustainable businesses, and in a way that we would build any great business. We look at good governance. We look at developing revenue streams. We look at how we bring other funders into the area of impact. We look at the business strategy, and we try to use impact measurement and management to try to inform that strategy. And as it says on the slide, impact measurement and management is a key part of that process. It's just it's embedded into pretty much everything we do. If we go to the next slide, Karim. What we try to do, what we feel it's important to do, and it's clear that others on the call think the same way, is that we society, business, the natural world is all interdependent. We have these holistic relationships that everyone, business and society has an impact on business. Sorry, people and society have an impact on business. Business has an impact on people and society, and we all have an impact on the natural world. And so what we try to do is to value both the natural capital, the human capital, and the social capital within Willstar, and the impact that we have on those three capitals. If you go to the next slide. Thanks, Karim. So how do we do that? We quite formal in trying to identify the sorts of activities that the organizations that we're funding are carrying out. What activities are there, and how do they have an impact on the social capital and the natural capital and the human capital that they're working on? So really thinking about, what are the drivers of impact? And so the activities that we're creating and the outputs that those activities create, the results essentially of the activities, are things that we think of as impact drivers. They're not impact, but they're drivers of impact. And what a lot of organizations, I'm not saying it's wrong, but a lot of organizations tend to stop here. We always hear, we have X number of participants on our education program, or we have X amount of dollars that we brought into a particular field. Well, we understand that those are really important numbers to get a grip of, and are really important to communicate. but it doesn't tell us how we impact the lives of the population that we're trying to work with. And so we try to shift our impact evaluation further to the right-hand side of this pathway, we call it, trying to understand really the change in the well-being of the populations that we're working with over the longer term. And we do that by using a methodology that was developed by an organization called Valuing Impact, but it's used quite extensively across the corporate world to look at the long-term impact that organizations have using a methodology called the health utility of income. And so what we try to do when we're working with these activities, we use that methodology to look at the well-being pathways, i.e. the non-economic pathways. To what extent are we impacting well-being within a community or within a group of people? And the actual economic pathways, so the dollars and cents. How are we shifting dollars and cents into a particular community or an engagement? And with those valuing both those well-being pathways or the outcomes in the well-being pathways and the economic pathways, we get an understanding of how we impact the change in people's well-being. So if you go to the next slide, Karim, what we try to do then is to value in dollars and cents, monetary value, the three types of capital: human capital, social capital, natural capital. We look at to what extent do we bring value into those three capitals, and to what extent are we contributing to help bringing value into those three capitals. And we try to use that then to build a strategy on, is this where we thought we were funding impact? Are these areas where when we initially went into the social investment, is this where we thought we would develop change? And the constant feedback that we have with the organizations that we fund allows us to really impact the strategy that the organizations that we work with have in order to maximize the impact that we can create. And it gives us a level of accountability too. So if we know that we're funding a particular organization with X thousands of dollars of philanthropic funding or impact investing funding, then we can hold ourselves to account to see, would it be better just to have distributed cash in this particular instance? Or actually, are we getting multiple times value in terms of the impact that we're creating? I can stop there, but as time is running on, but there are some resources that if you want to learn more, I'm sure Karim will share them later on how we do this.
Great. Thanks, Marcus. And just to say that, again, this is a very specific set of choices around thinking about valuation, monetization, and at least having seen how it's played out over the multiple years at how it's been deployed at WillStar. It's been such an integrated part of decision-making, but also used in a quite expansive way. I think one of the challenges of some of these kinds of tools and approaches, sometimes they're used in a fairly narrow way to ask questions around which is better, which has a higher number. And in some ways, recognizing that regardless of what approach you're using, whether it's valuation or others, to be able to ask the right questions, to be able to question your assumptions, and then to think about, well, what do we do next? That's more important rather than essentially over-relying on any one tool or approach. But maybe we'll come into that in the lesson section, because I know we have a couple of questions, again, that we'd want to get to. But in this section, we just wanted to, each of us, provide a couple of reflections and lessons for those of you that are on this journey in similar ways, regardless of whether you're early in the journey or a little bit more advanced. We want to share what's out there, the kinds of things that we find helpful, and also invite you to share your own resources and lessons and examples. And so I'm going to go, and then we'll go in order for each of the speakers, and then do some kind of final remarks after that and pick up on your questions. So I'm going to share 3 lessons. I think hopefully, as you will have seen by now, there is no need to start from scratch if you're thinking about doing this for your family office or really for any kind of impact investor. There's lots of starting points around strategy, around IMM, around frameworks, and even examples. I think these are some of the best ones, from these 3 organizations and people that you see on the call today. Each of them, and I think this is a good principle or lesson, have been able to think about the process of designing, testing, learning, and evolving as an iterative process. There's no way you do this and get it right the first time around. You have to think about this as a constant process of learning, evolution, and improvement. And in that way, you get the level of sophistication and really value add that IMM can truly offer you in terms of how you make decisions looking forward, not just looking back. And I think it's important to stress, this might be obvious, but too often, sometimes IMM is conflated with reporting. Now, there's a lot of good reasons why we do reporting, and sometimes it's externally driven, sometimes it's internally driven. But the sophistication and the discipline around doing IMM is really about trying to create more impact in the real world. We're not doing this just to get a better understanding of what we did and to report it. We really want it to be able to influence people's lives and improve the state of the planet. And in that vein, I wanted to share one resource, which is the Impact Investing Handbook from Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. Many of you will have seen this. There are 2 chapters specifically on IMM, including chapter 3, which is on defining impact goals and investment goals and the relationship between them using a systems lens. And then chapter 5 really gets into a lot of the questions and issues around IMM. So if you are a family office or really any kind of asset owner, you can work through each of these questions, which mirrors the framework that we use in the impact measurement program, starting with the why questions before the what and the how questions, and some of the considerations around how you manage for impact, which you'll see on the left-hand side. That's the outline of chapter 5. And we've picked up on a few of these questions around portfolios as well as monetization. On the right-hand side, you'll see there's a list of questions. And really, I think that's the kind of primary way you can think about how you might be able to build a robust IMM strategy. In fact, I think all 3 of the examples we've shared have been able to go through this in quite disciplined and thoughtful ways in order to be able to share the kinds of frameworks and tools that they've shared with you. So for those of you that are thinking about building your own strategies, I think this would be a really helpful resource and gives you, in some ways, again, another step-by-step guide to work through. Now I'll ask Olga to share their resources and lessons, because there's some great guides that Good and Well have published for the rest of the world that I think are helpful for others. So Olga, over to you.
Thank you. I love what Karim was saying about feeling comfortable with testing, because I think that that's what allows you to create more, be more innovative, be more flexible with what you're doing. So I'll share, so we have shared many of the mistakes we made in our process, in our guides. But here I'm going to share 3 that have been really important for us. So the first one is around theories of change. So because we want to be really flexible with the founders as they are getting into this process, we thought at the beginning, for some of them, we will co-design the theories of change with them. But for some that are really busy right now, you know what? Don't worry, we will do it for you. And this was such a big mistake. And later we realized that those that created the framework, created the process, and have the diagram, for them, IMM is very different, and the way how they use it and the way how they are engaged with the practice is very distinct. So, for example, one of them comes back every year and he tells me, please help me, like, rethink about this. I'm changing my strategy. How can I adapt this? He has even been able to use his theory of change to set up metrics for individual people in his team. So that's something really powerful, the way how they're using it when they're engaged. For those that we made the mistake and we made the theory of change for them, later we had to come back and redo the process. So that's one key learning. Then the second one is around ESG. So we created this ESG assessment to be run across the portfolio. And this was driven because, well, the founders are really committed to continuously improving their impact in all areas. So some of them want to become B Corps, and they also wanted to get started into that without paying the fees for the organization for B Corps, and just start improving what they were doing. So ESG was important for them because of that. Some others, because of the regulations that are being implemented mainly in Europe, they wanted to get up to speed with everything that they needed to get done. But here the mistake from our side was that after we ran the assessment across the portfolio, we also decided to compare the companies And I mean, this is not something that you can do because each company is at a different stage. And it's not the same to have an early one that maybe is just like thinking about how they can improve their diversity practices, that is already maybe implementing something without having a policy, compared to one that is in a later stage and maybe has all of these processes in place. You want to be very thoughtful about the intentionality of these founders and what can they get done at each stage. So that's why now we're building this model to think about what would be the threshold at each stage of growth. And then the last learning has been around just always asking, how is this information helpful for the businesses, for building the impact, and is there anything that is simpler or more cost effective that we could be using? One key example here is the aggregation of the portfolio. So at the beginning, we saw, well, everyone is aggregating their impact based on the SDG goals, and we thought we're going to do the same thing. We did it, we spent a bunch of time on it, and then we realized, well, we're not using this information for anything. The founders were like, how are you using this? We're like, well, no, we're not. So we stopped doing that. And that's one of the key things that we have changed in our framework. And here are the two resources that we wanted to share. So the first one is our approach to IMM that has a lot of like detail in terms of how we think about the core impact, the ESG assessments, the learnings that I was sharing, the mistakes that we have made. And then the other one is a step-by-step guide on, and it even has the detail like how to build these theories of change, how to think about the metrics, maybe what type of mix you want between the outputs and outcomes, the number of metrics. So you will find everything there. And if there's anything else, you can also reach out.
Great. Thanks, Olga. And, again, I think this has been great because in some ways you also see the mapping of the portfolio, some of the examples from the companies, as well as the evolution and lessons from Good and Well that are further described in the guides themselves. And this question around portfolio level impact is a challenging one. And I think everyone has a different approach around it. And, that might be something that we'll continue to see a range of different responses to, depending on obviously your strategy and how hands-on you are. But thank you, Olga, for sharing these resources. And again, we'll make sure that you're able to access all of those in the follow-up emails as well as on the slides. So Joanna, why don't you share your lessons and resources?
Yes, I mean, we could spend a whole webinar, I think, just talking about lessons learned, and maybe that is something we can do in the future. But two lessons I think that really rise to the top is the importance of engaging investment colleagues early and often as you are developing and iterating on your IMM approach. I mean, ultimately, because IMM is not an afterthought, it's not just a box checking exercise. We really want it to drive value for both our partners and our staff. It's important to engage with the folks who are actually going to be using the data to do just that. And so we made a point to engage our investment colleagues really early in the process to better understand, okay, what information is most meaningful to you and our investment strategy that we can then integrate into or make sure that we are capturing through our IMM practices and principles. And secondly, just it's a little bit of a variation on the theme, but IMM, we really see IMM as a value creation lever, and therefore it's, to Karim's point, is not just about reporting. It's about how we can help companies and fund managers position themselves for success in the market, and whether that is preparing them for emerging regulations, differentiating themselves in the market for fundraising and marketing activities, also product market fit, and ultimately, of course, enhancing positive impact for people and planet. And so really wanting to work with them throughout the investment process to think of IMM or use IMM as a value creation tool for them. And so on that note, we did develop an impact playbook that is geared toward mostly early stage companies to help them think through, what are the impact considerations, what are the ESG considerations that they can incorporate into their business plans over using a maturity model. So, early stage companies, are not all, anyway, calibrating the considerations based on, where they are as a company and their growth strategy. And then just last year, we also published an impact report that tells you more about just how we're structured as a family office, our approach to IMM, and that and some data that we've collected from partners that help us measure contributions toward these kind of strategy level outcomes that we're pursuing in each of our focus areas. So really excited about that, and would love any feedback. We welcome any feedback if you are able to take a look.
Right. Thanks, Joanna. And so again, to reiterate, we'll share these. Both of those documents have a lot more detail, regardless of the stage that you are building on. And we'll get to a couple of related questions in a minute, but why don't I hand it over to Marcus just for your lessons and resources, and then we'll pick up on a few of the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Karim. I think the key thing for us and the lesson that we had sort of 6 or 7 years ago when we started this was you just start. You're never going to have the perfect solution immediately, and you will grow into the solution. And of course, as we've seen today, everyone's improving how we measure impact year upon year, even within the organizations that are extremely mature and are doing it every day. So just get started and don't worry about the kind of imperfect nature of the particular solution that you want to use. And that solution is going to be different from all of us. You have to kind of build your own version of it and what's going to be aligned with you. But the very foundations that you're hearing about understanding impact with the people that have been talking today have given us all kind of I'm pretty sure we all start with the same foundations in terms of the IMP and the impact management project and others. So it's a good place to start. And then within the organization, I'm a kind of a great believer that philanthropy and impact investing won't get us out of this mess. We need key business leaders to also start to think about impact measurement and management within, normal businesses. And so if you're trying to, if you're one of the individuals in one of those organizations that are trying to pull those sorts of levers, then just get 1 or 2 people in those organizations to back you. You don't have to have everybody on your side. We know it's a difficult journey that you're going to be on to try to get impact measurement and management kind of pushed into mainstream business. So just try to get 1 or 2 people to kind of be your champion and work with them. And don't waste time on people whose doors are closed or who are skeptical about this. There are far too many people to be working with on impact measurement within organizations for you to bang your head against the wall for too long with people that aren't going to prepare to listen. We have the white paper that you see here that's listed that has some of the lessons that we've learned. We co-authored that with Valuing Impact, the organization that we partner with to value our impact. And the link that you see at the bottom has the resources that we also use. So the health utility of income and the health utility of taxes that we use to actually put dollars and cents valuations on the impact that we create. So there's a lot of resources there too. Thanks, Karim.
Great. Thanks, Marcus. And again, within this white paper itself, there's a pretty, important set of both how the design choices were made, what are some of the limitations, acknowledging the complexity, but also the right type of use of this particular set of approaches. And I think regardless of what set of choices you make, and you can see there's very different choices across these 3 examples. It's important to just contextualize it to what you're trying to achieve. And in this case, hopefully you got a sense of how the overall strategies of each of the family offices has informed the nature and type of choices they're making around IMM, but also recognizing that the more you do, the more you learn and you evolve over time. And just to give us, I think, all a bit of comfort, and there's a lot of these starting points that others have tried as well, whether it's more broadly around IMM. There's a few resources here, some of which we've already talked about, and we will add actually a couple of more when we share this out with you. So whether you are beginning to design IMM, whether you are a family office that is just thinking about impact investing, there are many starting points around resources, roadmaps, and even networks and learning platforms that allow you to be able to get to the level of some of these examples. Because even if it feels, I think, somewhat sophisticated, and I think these are some of the best examples out there, the reality is you can get there by being disciplined and doing this in a somewhat structured way, but also reminding yourself you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I think all three groups, not to speak on behalf of them necessarily, but just knowing their journeys, have had to work with other colleagues internally within their organizations. Everything from introducing the concepts of impact and ESG through to some of the more technical challenges of measurement, through to the change management implications of when you begin to use impact data alongside financial data, how does it change decision-making processes? The way you construct a portfolio, the way you manage for impact. Those are the kinds of things that we're all beginning to explore as we think about what impact management looks like in practice. And so before we get to the concluding remarks, I'm just going to ask for a couple of the questions that we haven't yet answered through the Q&A function. I'll direct them to each of our speakers. And maybe I will start with you, Marcus. There's a lot of, there was this question or almost like a comment around valuing a life and how challenging that is, etc. But also, I guess the broader question for me would just be, how would you respond to this sometimes, challenge of using valuation in the right ways when sometimes it feels like a quite daunting technical exercise? And I think you've been quite honest about both its limitations, but also its opportunity when we think about how you are bringing others along within your family office who understand the language of numbers, let's say, to be able to appreciate the nuance around impact.
Yeah, I think that one of the reasons that we chose valuation, and I do absolutely get the question of, what does a life cost and why should one value it? The world did that through COVID. That we had major health decisions that were made globally as a result of valuing lives. So it's not that it isn't happening, but in the context of doing it within business, I think that sometimes it's a little difficult. I have found, at least when we started impact measurement, and I'm only speaking for the organization that I work with, is that it was very difficult to communicate impact and the importance of understanding it with a kind of a reference number, 8 out of 10 for impact or 7 out of 10 for impact. We needed to talk the language of accountants and the language that the CEOs and the CFOs were really going to engage with. And if we wanted to put this into core businesses, then we needed to put dollars and cents numbers on it. And so with our cohort or with the organizations that we were working with, it was the best solution. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Karim.
And maybe, Joanna, this is a question for you. I mean, there was a question more broadly about the multiple forms of capital. I guess maybe I'll rephrase the question slightly and just ask, you're working across such an expansive set of different kinds of capital, different types of team members. Again, any advice, lessons, or kind of questions you have around thinking about how to bring it all together in a coherent way. You previously worked in philanthropy as well as field building. What are you trying to do or learning about how you do this now in a family office setting?
Yeah, I think so. In 2002, for each of those focus areas that we developed cross-office impact frameworks, theories of change, impact theses, whatever term you wanna use, that outline exactly the long-term and the near-term outcomes that we are aiming for, and that we can really kind of converge around across the office. And then so we like to think of ourselves as kind of issue first, tool second. So there are all these complex, hairy issues, certain certain types of capital are kind of they each have a role in each of these focus areas, and some are better suited to some issues than others. And so we are just kind of asking ourselves, okay, if this is what we're ultimately trying to achieve or contribute to, what types of capital is needed to advance toward those goals. So I don't know if that answers their question, but really thinking about ultimately what is it that we're trying to achieve, and then thinking about what's the right type of capital or a combination of capital that we really need in order to address the barrier that's keeping us from achieving that positive outcome for people and planet.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. I think it's a powerful question for family offices that have these multiple types of capital and capabilities in-house to be able to continue to ask, because certainly the answer changes over time.
Exactly.
Great. And so we'll do a final kind of remark and reflection from Olga, because I know we're slightly over time, and then I'll wrap us up. But Olga, there were a couple of questions just around your approach to metrics and ESG. So maybe as a general reflection, as you are thinking about what's next in bringing together some of these, this question of value add of IMM and ESG and the role that you're playing as a family office, what would you hope to achieve over the next couple of years as you think about, where you are and the ways you're supporting your companies today versus what that might look like over the next few years?
That's a really big question, Karim. There are a couple of examples that we have right now. That, for example, the one that I was sharing about this founder that is using his metrics, his theory of change to set up KPIs for all the team members. And I think that that's such a great example of how you can embed IMM into strategy at all levels. That every employee understands that what they're doing is contributing towards something bigger. And I think that that's what I would like to see in the next 5 years, at least, to see not only everyone working in this space feeling proud of what they're doing and really thinking about how they can do their work better, how they can have that deeper impact, but at the same time, how this can help other organizations that maybe are not thinking about how they can contribute to be inspired and start adopting some of these practices. So that's my greatest hope.
Great. Thanks, Olga. I mean, it was a big question, and I think that was a great answer. So I just want to wrap us up now because we've given you a bit of a window, a very quick window into, I think, a lot of richness that each of these three organizations have in terms of their approach, their lessons, their tools and frameworks. We will be sharing all of this in terms of the resources, and we then invite follow-up. Joanna, as you maybe previewed, we might do a part 2 in some of the deep dives around lessons and approaches and tools, because there's certainly a lot more to talk about. But we want to thank all of you for being here. We also just want to share that there are a number of things that are coming up on related topics that might be of interest to you. We have another webinar coming up in 2 weeks with Alex Nichols, who's the academic director of the program, as well as myself and 2 of our speakers and faculty on where are we today in a landscape of impact measurement and what might be next. We have a few more spots open for our program. We're almost full. So get in touch with us quickly if you are still interested for this year. And for those of you that are attending any of the events in April at the Skull World Forum or Marmalade, we have 3 sessions that you might be interested in. I'm hosting a session on Wednesday around how systems change and systems lens approaches can influence how we think about both impact investing as well as how we measure. We have a session on Thursday around scaling impact with integrity and what that looks like. And then Friday, Gail Peterson, who leads our social finance and impact investing programs, is doing a session there. All of these are free and you're welcome to attend. And if you're coming to the AVPN conference, please get in touch with us. We have an event that we're hosting and we'd love to have you join us as well. So thank you for that. I also want to thank our 3 speakers. I think they're all doing some remarkable work. They've been also very generous with their time and their resources and are really committed to building out this field and sharing what they learn as we go. So thank you, Marcus, Joanna, and Olga. It's been a pleasure working with all of you, and it's been great to also host this and hope we do it again in the next couple of years as our part 2. And thank all of you. Please get in touch with us if you've got any feedback. You'll get the recording, the slides, and the links within the next week or so. And so with that, we will sign off. Thanks so much.
Thank you.